Hi, my name is Stephanie, and today I wanted to talk to you about how non-speaking or non-reliably speaking autistic people communicate. Now, you may be more familiar with the term nonverbal. However, I will be using the term non-speaking as this does appear to be the current preference of the community. One statistic claims that about 40% of autistic people who have been diagnosed are also nonverbal. However, there is no reliable line as to what constitutes nonverbal, and nonverbal autism is not actually a diagnosis. Some autistic people may be considered nonverbal or non-speaking, but are more non-reliably speaking because they can say some words or verbalize somewhat, but that this isn't really something that is a main mode for them. Some may also be considered in this category if they only primarily use echolalia, whether it's been considered to be functional or not. And others may be considered pre-verbal, that being not speaking yet, but they might speak later in life. This is especially true of children. The biggest reason pointed to for the issues with speech or even other forms of communication for non-speaking autistic people is something called apraxia, which is intimately connected to dyspraxia, which we've learned about before on my channel. According to one 3-year study, nearly 2/3 of children initially diagnosed with autism also had apraxia. I'll go over apraxia more in another video. I just want you to know that those with high support needs often have apraxia as well. I've been happy to see so much interest from you all regarding non-speakers, and I'm actually going to be releasing a project in which I was able to interview a few non-speaking autistic advocates. I really hope to be able to get that project published by the end of 2022, since it has been quite a while in the making. Now, for that reason, I thought it would be enlightening to understand a little bit more about how non-speakers communicate. Now, starting at the very basic level, non-speakers communicate just like anybody else through things like body language. In fact, this is why ABA can be quite an issue for non-speakers, because how are you supposed to be able to communicate with your behavior when someone is constantly trying to force your behavior to look how they want it to? Now, most people close to non-speakers can tell you what happy stims are, or what shows how someone is excited or happy, or things that might show sadness, distress, or anger. Learning an autistic person's body language can be a bit more difficult because it's not always as typical. However, body language and behavior can only get you so far. One cannot communicate that their ear has been hurting for hours, or what they think of their favorite characters in a story just through these methods. It is important to note that many non-speaking autistic people have not yet been given access to communication. Some parents and families have tried literally everything they can find to try to give their autistic family member access to communication, and nothing seems to be working for them. This can be devastating for both the family and the autistic person. Some families don't have the resources to pursue certain methods. Others might not realize what options are even out there. Some families might just really want to hear the words "I love you" spoken out loud to them, even though their child shows them that they love them in other ways. It is important not to presume a lack of intelligence or competence on behalf of a non-speaker just because they don't speak or seem uncooperative. I couldn't imagine what it would be like to never really be able to express complex thoughts or ideas because my body wouldn't listen to my brain. I'd like to circle back to presuming competence later on in this video. Another form of communication is echolalia, even though some might consider their child to be non-speaking or non-reliably speaking because of their use of echolalia and scripting alone. I'll link you to a video on either side explaining the importance of scripting and how it can be used functionally to communicate. I did want to briefly include it, even though it does involve speech, because some people don't see it as a form of communication. I also want to mention that alongside many of these methods, people often are working with speech-language pathologists to be able to try to form words with their mouth. Most of the time when we're talking about how non-speakers communicate, we're actually looking for more of an understanding of AAC. AAC stands for Augmentative and Alternative Communication. As the site AssistiveWare puts it, AAC can be tools, systems, devices, or strategies. These tools can help a person communicate when they cannot rely on speech. They explain that augmentative communication is adding something to your speech to help make your message clear, and alternative communication is for when you can't speak or your speech isn't clear enough to be understood, so you need another way to communicate. Thus, the rest of the methods that we are going to discuss are considered AAC, either low-tech or high-tech. Some autistic people do learn an altered form of sign language to be able to communicate. Now, I'm considering this AAC because most of the time it's not because they're deaf and it's their primary language, but rather to support communication because they cannot speak or cannot be understood. Now, this kind of sign language is often needs-based rather than maybe complex thoughts, etc. Hand signals can be hard, especially those that require multiple movements for those who have praxis or motor planning issues. One study done with deaf autistic children and deaf typically developing children found that deaf children with autism spectrum disorder had greater errors in pace, sequence precision, accuracy, and body part use, and also took longer to fingerspell each word. So even when sign language is their mother tongue, many autistic people have dyspraxic issues that make it hard to communicate in this way. However, an autistic person may be able to better expand into more than needs-based communication using this, considering all they need is their hands and, of course, the knowledge of what different words are. The next one is one that I've heard that a lot of people have tried, and it's called PECS, or Picture Exchange Communication System. Now, that is a specifically trademarked system. However, many people might alter this and basically use the concept of words and pictures on cards traded out to be able to communicate, basically. Now, I am a little bit hesitant about the trademarked version purely because it is rooted in behaviorism. According to the PECS USA website, the PECS teaching protocol is based on B.F. Skinner's book, Verbal Behavior, and broad spectrum applied behavior analysis. Now, while I am hesitant regarding the behaviorism aspects, I do think that it is extremely important to open up any avenue of communication for someone who is currently not really able to do so reliably. Even opening the door to help people around the autistic person see that that person actually is understanding can have tremendous value. The problem with PECS is that it is in itself quite limited. Basically, it starts out with having the person exchange a picture for something they want, and in true ABA fashion, they immediately get what they want to reinforce the behavior at first. The steps slowly increase to basically seeking out a person further away with a picture of what they want, to picking between two picture options, and later on adding sentence structure. Basically adding I want to teddy bear. Then they go on to adding some more things like adjectives and verbs, then answering someone who asks what they want through the PECS board. And finally, they're supposed to be able to put together more complex things, such as I see, I hear, I feel. As a speech-language pathologist shares in her blog, while the system gives children a reason to try to communicate in this method and helps children to learn to seek out someone to communicate with, as well as being easy for professionals to learn to implement, it has a lot of cons. She notes many limitations, such as vocabulary, grammar, and complexity, and that her students rarely successfully get through all the phases to be able to get to phases meant for expression rather than just requesting. Now, if an autistic person simply has apraxia of speech, basically just their speech is affected, and they still have fine motor skills, they might just be able to write to communicate. And even if the fine motor skill isn't quite there are adaptations to make pencils and pens or whatnot easier to grasp. Perhaps one of the most well-known systems when using the term AAC is text-to-speech or similar programs that might use symbols or word groups or whatnot to help the person be able to say what they want to say through an iPad or something similar. Many programs may try to lead to this as an eventual goal, since it allows for expressive thoughts authored by the person and isn't limited to I want, I see, etc. types of things through cards, for example. Unfortunately, cost is often a barrier when it comes to these. Special systems often come with a big price tag, and the mobile devices aren't always exactly affordable. In fact, some of these programs are subscription based, so not only are they expensive, but they are expensive consistently. This also requires a charged battery to be able to communicate. For this reason, many times a tablet will actually be used more part-time to be used alongside other forms of communication. This leads us to a low-tech alternative, which doesn't require charging or tons of cards, nor the fine motor skills that often evade those with apraxia in multiple areas. This is something called letterboard. The person points to different letters to be able to spell out what they want to say. However, they do have a communication partner who helps them, maybe by holding the board at eye level or whatnot, or in the case of facilitated communication, holding their arm. Methods such as spelling to communicate or rapid prompting method do not touch the person, but they do hold boards, starting out with large stencils and a pencil to be able to indicate the letter that they need. This is really helpful because it works around the issues that apraxia can cause for people that has been a barrier for them to communicate in many of the other options. Often they're able to actually build up to using a tablet to communicate in these situations. However, many still choose to use letterboard alongside it, as again, it's a low-tech version. They don't have to keep it charged. It's just a letterboard that they can take with them anywhere. Now, this is not the same as facilitated communication. I say this because facilitated communication is considered by many to be debunked, since the person working with them is holding their arm. This has led to many people pretending that the non-speaking person said things that they did not. This is a valid concern. Not only could misrepresenting what this person is wanting to communicate be horrible and manipulative to the family, but also to the person who is trying to communicate and someone is pretending that they're saying something that they're not. The amount of violation there is really high. Here's the thing though, a 2012 case study used eye tracking technology that supports the likelihood that the autistic person's words through facilitated communication were actually authored by them. They were thought to have no literacy skills, and yet were producing sophisticated texts through these means. A lot of doubt has been cast onto the authorship of words attributed to non-speakers because they need communication partners. Sadly, there were cases where people used facilitated communication and pretended that this person was saying something that they weren't. However, that does not mean that all cases are like this. Simply assuming that someone who has high support needs couldn't possibly be able to communicate in a sophisticated way or produce sophisticated responses, text, or whatever is honestly quite ableist. And I don't like using that word. Another thought on skepticism regarding the authorship of those using letterboard is well put by the researchers of the paper I mentioned, as they state the following. One immediate response to the skeptical position is why. This FC user is a person who, one, does not usually sit in close proximity to others, allowing one hand to be supported for hours. 2, would not readily sit in a hot room filled with monitors, cameras, and computers. 3, would not normally wear anything on his head. 4, is not a compliant person. 5, would not do any other task for hours, let alone a strenuous one that involves staring at a screen that quickly makes one's eyes tired. Why would this man sit for so long making what the skeptical viewpoint are meaningless ballistic arm movements toward a screen sparsely covered with uninteresting, neutrally colored static shapes, while all the time attending to that screen and consistently following the movement of his finger around it with his eyes? This one-time observation already stretches the plausibility of the facilitator influence account of these data, although of course it by no means rules it out. While they say that it by no means rules it out, I feel like you would have to really, it's beyond reasonable doubt. It is well beyond reasonable doubt. It is no longer reasonable giving this person, this situation, etc., with all of the data that they have, with the kind of person that they are working with. It is beyond reasonable. Another thing that some people are like, well, actually, the autistic person is watching the eye movements of the communication partner. And so then they point to the letter that they're supposed to point to because they saw the facilitator or the communication partner look at that letter. You would rather believe that someone is so skilled to be able to tell what specific letter. Okay, look, I can tell that someone is looking at something in general when, like a letterboard like this big. Yeah, okay. I would not be able to tell specifically what letter they want. Maybe the areas, but it's absurdity. You think that this person is incapable of intelligent thought, but somehow they can track the eyes of the communication partner. And this, of course, is used to try to debunk the other forms which involve not touching the autistic person at all. So there is no, rule. They call it the Ouija board effect. They're like, well, maybe they're moving the board, but they're not moving it like way over. Sometimes they do move it closer or a little bit to assist, but it's not like they're trying over here and they're like, oh, let me put you over here. And with the facilitated communication, again, yes, perhaps someone could move the elbow or something like that. But with this case study, that doesn't make any sense. You actually are kind of an awful person if you would rather believe that this person is incapable of those things, despite the great amount of evidence in front of your face to the contrary. An autistic blogger who uses letterboard from learning using rapid prompting method, Mitchell Robbins, says that using spelling-based communication has changed his life. No one touches him or moves his letterboard, they just hold it at eye level for him. According to his mother in previous therapies, he wouldn't be able to pick which card had a happy face on it, which had fueled her skepticism that Mitchell would even be able to learn how to spell. Even with facilitated communication's kind of dodgy past, with some people trying to use the non-speaking person like a puppet, the case study really refutes this idea that all facilitated communication is bogus, because clearly that person was the person communicating. Additionally, a 25-year-old non-speaker, Emily Groden, is finally being able to share her story using facilitated communication, and she was able to prove that it was her speaking or her communicating by what she talked about. Groden's parents and medical experts were convinced it was really her speaking, because from the beginning, Groden was writing about things, from specifics of her medication to Jewish observances that her aide had no knowledge of. While methods other than facilitated communication would be preferable to be able to avoid abuse by aides or possibly moving the arm from the elbow, it is an extremely valuable method for those who don't have the motor capabilities and need the support at their elbow. And I do agree that there should be some sort of screening process to make sure that they're not being taken advantage of by an aide and that that person is the one communicating. But this should be a pretty simple process, whether that's asking questions only that person would know, or doing a small test where they're even just basic random things and the communication partner is not aware of those things, and are they able to communicate still. It's not that hard, I feel like, to be able to test this, but the discourse around this acts like it is, which is extremely frustrating because, again, these are voices of people who have struggled and for so long have been unable to communicate with people, just to have people be like, well, it's probably not actually them, or it's not actually them, you can't prove it's actually them. And this is frustrating because you wouldn't really assume someone say that they lost their function for speech and they had a stroke and they were able to use a method like this. You wouldn't say, oh, that's not them, and that's the facilitator. Oh, that's the person who was holding the board for them. That doesn't make sense. but you would do the same thing for someone who's autistic. And I just don't understand where this double standard comes from, other than ableism, honestly. Now, some people worry that using AAC will somehow interfere with the ability to speak or the desire to speak. So some people are like, well, if they use AAC, they won't need to try to speak, so they're not going to. Honestly, this feels very like a behavioral perspective, where the concept is like, well, they're not motivated to by blah, blah, blah. However, according to the NIH, current research does not support a common fear that using AAC methods will hinder the development of spoken language. So that fear doesn't really stand up to actual research. Some people argue, kind of in the same vein as those skeptical of alternative forms of communication, that it is somehow harmful or dangerous to presume competence. They argue that it would be cruel to assume that someone knows more than like primary level and try to talk to them or teach them at a level that's higher than them. However, an occupational therapist in a 2008 paper argues that there is more danger in not presuming intelligence. Tests that wrongly placed someone at an elementary level may never get to learn anything or be given any sort of opportunity for growth other than, what color is the sun? What's the weather today? Is it cloudy? Is it raining? And hearing that over and over and over and over just because these intelligence tests were incorrect. That does so much more damage and can be so much more damaging to somebody than presuming that they actually understand what's going on. The OT argues that the least dangerous assumption suggests that when there is no absolute evidence, it is essential to make the safest and most respectful assumption that would be the least dangerous to the individual if proven to be false. And I believe that it is arguably more dangerous to the person to continue to treat them like a primary school, pre-K, kindergarten person when they are at the same capacity as someone else their age. It is more harmful to that person to deny them education. It is more harmful to that person to deny them any sort of growth and to treat them like a small child if you're proven to be false in your assumption that they're illiterate and they don't understand anything. It is far more dangerous for them and harmful for them than having them try talking to them like a human being their age and trying to teach them higher concepts. Because in that case, they didn't understand. Then okay, they didn't understand, but wouldn't that be pretty much the same as what you think before, right? Like if someone's completely illiterate and completely doesn't understand anything, even working with colors, wouldn't they still not really understand if you're continually keeping them at the same level anyway? So here, if you were proven, oh, that person actually really doesn't understand anything, then what's the difference between you treating them at their age level and treating them at the level of primary colors? In the paper published in the American Journal of Occupational Therapy, they focus on listening to the voice of an 18-year-old named David in the paper, who was diagnosed with PDD-NOS, apraxia of speech, and dyspraxia. His many insights that are shared in that paper really read like a love letter to occupational therapy and access to communication. On being able to access communication at age 14, he says, "I began so angry typing and never had dreamed to be having dreams ever. Then the typing here in OT freed my little voice to be heard, and I could release anger finally. And I could need no more to hold in all my thoughts, because I can tell in real words finally all I needed. And little by little, through years of daily struggle of working the muscles and trying to focus to stay still and really learning to feel my body move when I walk or talk and control movements." Throughout the paper, he shares about how occupational therapy helps him feel more connected and in control of his body rather than his body being in control of him. This is a sentiment I have heard before from other non-speakers, which may contribute to the difficulty in engaging in some of the forms of communication that may be more conventional. I hope this video helps you understand how non-speakers communicate and some of the difficulties in doing so, maybe why people would go for different types of communication and a little bit of a conversation around letterboard and facilitated communication. I hope you found this video informative and or useful or something to that effect. If you did, go ahead and hit that like button and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think that there should be more research into all forms of spelling to communicate, whether that's specifically the program or like using letterboard in general? Did you already know about these different ways that non-speakers use to communicate? Let me know all of that in the comments below. If you enjoy autism-related content from me, you can go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I do try to upload every Thursday at 4 p.m. Central Standard Time, except for the last Thursday of the month, when I usually try to go live with you all. Thank you to everyone who supports me here on YouTube as YouTube channel members, through Ko-fi, and as patrons on Patreon. And a special thank you to my Spinny Stimmy tier patrons, Jack Varney and Philip Noah. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!